Drop. You're having a genuinely good day. Nothing dramatic. Just easy. Work went fine. You got home. Maybe you laughed at something. And then, somewhere around the evening, it just drops. Not gradually, not slowly. The good feeling doesn't fade away. It just disappears. And what replaces it isn't exactly sadness. It's more like a dull flatness. The kind that makes the earlier happiness feel almost suspicious. And for a lot of people, that's the worst part. Not the low itself, but the contrast. Your brain spent hours running warm, and then suddenly it stopped. And the gap between those two states, that's what stings. What's strange is that this usually happens on days when nothing actually went wrong, which makes it even harder to explain to anyone else because you can't point to a reason. The day was fine. Everything was fine. And somehow, that almost makes it worse. Like your mood doesn't even need a cause to turn on you. Rage. Everything is fine. And then suddenly, it isn't. Someone leaves a cabinet open or says something slightly off, and the reaction that comes up feels completely out of proportion to what actually happened. You know it in the moment. You can feel the gap between the size of the emotion and the size of the trigger, but knowing that doesn't make the feeling smaller. It's still there, sharp, immediate, just beneath the surface. And most of the time, this feeling didn't start with the cabinet or the comment. There was already something underneath it. Hunger, poor sleep, a full week of low-grade stress that never really left your system. The cabinet didn't cause anything, neither did the comment. They just arrived at the wrong moment and touched everything that had been building quietly in the background, without a name. And that's the frustrating part, because by the time you finally understand what was actually happening, the moment is already over. The words have already been said, or maybe the silence already happened. Surge. You haven't done anything differently. Same sleep, same routine, same kind of day. And yet, somewhere in the late afternoon, or randomly, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary evening, something shifts. Suddenly, you feel switched on. Your thoughts move faster. You want to get up, move, start something, finish something. There's this sudden pull toward action, and for once, it doesn't feel forced. These moments usually feel incredible while they're happening. Clear, focused, alive, but they're unpredictable. They arrive without warning, and sometimes they disappear the exact same way, mid-task, mid-thought, mid-motivation, which creates its own kind of frustration, because once you've felt that energy, you immediately notice when it's gone. And people usually respond to these moments in one of two ways. Some chase them, trying to get as much done as possible before the window closes. Others become a little suspicious of them because they've experienced what comes after the drop. And sometimes that drop arrives just as suddenly as the rise did. Either way, you didn't choose the timing. Your body made that decision for you. Gloom. Nothing happened, and honestly, that's the hardest part to explain to someone who hasn't felt it before. There was no bad news, no difficult conversation, no obvious reason for the feeling to be there. You just wake up, and somehow the weight is already waiting for you, sitting on the day before it's even started. Or sometimes, it arrives quietly in the middle of the afternoon, no warning, no announcement. Just a sudden heaviness that wasn't there an hour ago. And when this happens, most people immediately start searching for a reason. They replay the week in their head, looking for something to blame, a conversation, a mistake, a moment they missed. And sometimes, they find something small enough to pin it on, but often, the honest answer is harder than that. There isn't a clear reason. Or at least, not one that fully explains the feeling. Because the body has its own schedule for these things. Hormones shift. Sleep affects more than most people realize. And sometimes, the nervous system just runs heavy for a while. No clear cause, no dramatic explanation, and eventually, it passes the same way it arrived. Quietly, without explanation. NPC mode. After a long enough stretch of too much stress, too many demands, too many things asking something from you, something inside starts to go quiet. And eventually, you notice the responses aren't coming the way they used to. Something happens that should probably bother you, and somehow it doesn't. Not really. Then something good happens, and you wait for the feeling to arrive, but it's quieter than it should be, dimmer, further away. And from the outside, this can look a lot like depression. But internally, it often feels different. Less like sadness, and more like the system pulled back to protect itself. Like your brain turned the volume down across the board, just to keep from burning out completely. People who experience this sometimes describe it the same way, like watching their own life from a slight distance, still present, still functioning, but not fully inside any of it. Conversations happen, days pass, things get done, but emotionally, everything feels slightly muted, slightly disconnected. And usually, this state lifts once the pressure finally eases, once the nervous system stops feeling cornered. But while it's there, it has a way of making the entire world feel muffled, like life is happening just one layer away from where you're standing. Rush, the opposite of unexplained sadness, and somehow almost just as disorienting. You wake up, and everything feels lighter than it should. Nothing actually changed. The problems are still there. The to-do list is the same. The week ahead looks exactly like the last one. And yet, something about the way you're carrying all of it feels different. The same things that felt heavy yesterday suddenly feel manageable. You're quicker to laugh, softer with yourself, more patient, and somehow the day moves without friction, like the weight of everything has been turned down slightly, without explanation. And most people don't question this feeling too much, which honestly makes sense, because compared to the lows, this version feels good. But underneath it, it's still the same phenomenon. The same unexplained shift in state, just moving in the opposite direction. Maybe your chemistry shifted slightly. Maybe your sleep finally lined up the right way. Maybe your body recalibrated something quietly in the background. Whatever the reason, you didn't consciously create it. And eventually, you won't be able to hold on to it either. Most people don't mind that part nearly as much. D&D era. Yesterday, you were completely fine around people, normal conversations, normal energy, nothing felt off. And then today, the idea of socializing feels genuinely exhausting. Not because anything happened, not because someone upset you. Nobody necessarily did anything wrong. The pull is just inward, strong, specific, almost impossible to ignore. And that's what makes this different from simple introversion. Introversion is more like a baseline. This feels more like a sudden shift, a door quietly closing. You cancel plans you normally would have enjoyed. You let messages sit unanswered. You look at notifications and immediately feel tired. More than anything, you want quiet, and you want it without having to explain yourself, which becomes its own problem, because the people waiting on the other side of those unanswered messages don't have the context you do. To them, it can look personal, but internally, it usually isn't. Most of the time, the feeling passes within a day or two. The system resets. The social battery comes back online. But while this state is active, forcing yourself to push through it anyway usually makes things worse, not better. Because underneath all of it, the body is asking for something: stillness, silence, recovery. And forcing the opposite rarely ends the way people hope it will. Jitters. Your body is moving like something is wrong, even though nothing actually is. Your chest feels slightly tight. Your breathing sits just a little too high. You're moving faster than the situation in front of you really requires. Thoughts keep jumping ahead to outcomes that haven't happened and probably won't. There's a restlessness to the entire day. Sitting still feels difficult, and focusing on any one thing becomes strangely hard. What makes this mood shift tricky is that from the inside, it can actually feel productive. You're doing things, answering messages, switching tasks, moving quickly, so it feels like momentum. But the quality of your attention isn't fully there. Your brain is scattered across 5 different places at once, and by the end of the day, you're exhausted in a way that doesn't match what you actually accomplished. That's the strange part. The energy feels high, but the output rarely matches it. And while this can resemble anxiety from the outside, it isn't always anxiety in the clinical sense. Sometimes it's just a nervous system that's slightly over-revved, too much caffeine, too little sleep, a low-grade worry. That never got directly acknowledged. So the body keeps running in the background, like an engine that never fully powered down. And by nighttime, you're more drained than your day should realistically account for. Slump. Somewhere around mid-afternoon, usually between 2 and 4, a heaviness quietly arrives. And most of the time, it has almost nothing to do with how your day is actually going. Your focus softens. Simple tasks start feeling slightly harder than they should. Your body is still moving, but it feels like everything is happening at 3/4 speed. Thoughts slow down, motivation dips, even small decisions begin to feel strangely effortful. And what's interesting is that this is one of the most universal mood shifts people experience, because underneath it, there's usually a very physical reason. The body runs on a natural rhythm throughout the day, and during that afternoon window, core temperature drops slightly. Energy drops with it. A heavy lunch tends to make the feeling stronger. Sitting still too long usually makes it worse. And most people respond in one of 2 ways. They reach for caffeine, which helps temporarily, but often steals from their sleep later. Or they've learned to work with the rhythm instead of against it. Lighter tasks, less demanding work, a slower pace for an hour or 2. Because eventually, the sharpness comes back on its own. The system resets. It just takes a little time. Void. You finally finished something. A long project, a difficult week, maybe just a stretch of constant pressure that finally ended. And strangely, instead of relief, what arrives first is emptiness, flatness, a strange silence where the pressure used to be. And this catches a lot of people off guard, because they expected to feel good, but the body and mind had been operating at a heightened level for so long that once the demand disappears, there's no immediate gear to shift into. The system suddenly has space and doesn't know what to do with it. People often describe these moments as feeling purposeless. Not deeply unhappy, Just unclear, because the motivation that carried them through the stress no longer has anywhere to go, and until something new appears, a new goal, a new problem, a new direction, the emptiness lingers, quietly, and eventually, it usually passes. Something new takes hold. The mind reorients itself, but in the space between one chapter and the next, the low can feel surprisingly real, especially because it arrives at the exact moment people expected relief instead. Nostalgic. Usually it starts with something small, a song, a smell, an old photo appearing out of nowhere, and suddenly, part of you isn't fully in the present anymore. There's this quiet pull backward, a soft ache for something you can't completely return to. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a period of life, sometimes it's an older version of yourself that felt lighter, easier, more alive. And what makes nostalgia complicated is that it isn't purely sad, there's warmth inside it too, which is why people often stay in it longer than they mean to. For a moment, it feels comforting, familiar, safe, but if you follow the feeling far enough, the warmth slowly changes shape. And underneath it, there's usually grief, a quiet realization that whatever you're reaching toward is gone in a way that can't fully be recreated. And that's what makes nostalgia one of the more bittersweet emotional shifts. It begins somewhere comforting and quietly ends somewhere that aches. Afterward, the rest of the day often feels slightly flatter. You return to whatever you were doing, but something about the present moment feels smaller than it did before. Ick. This one is difficult to describe while you're inside it, because you're not exactly sad, not anxious, not even fully tired, just unsettled, like something about the day feels slightly off, without any clear explanation for why. You move from room to room, pick up your phone, put it back down, open apps without really wanting anything from them. You're searching for something, but you don't fully know what it is, and whatever is currently in front of you never quite feels right. There's this low-level dissatisfaction sitting underneath everything. Quiet, constant, hard to name, and most of the time, this feeling comes from some kind of mismatch. The body needs something that the mind hasn't identified clearly yet. Sometimes it's boredom pretending to be restlessness. Sometimes it's loneliness that hasn't fully surfaced. Sometimes it's movement, meaning, connection, something quietly missing beneath the surface. But because the signal is vague, it's difficult to act on directly, so the feeling lingers, and usually, it doesn't fully disappear until something finally clicks into place. A conversation, a walk, a moment of focus, a change in environment, something that unexpectedly fits. And the strange part is, you almost never know in advance what that thing is going to be.